Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
You ever heard of the company Gallup, as in Gallup polls? I mean, chances are most of you listening have. If you haven't, Gallup is one of the most well-known public opinion and research firms in the world. They've been running global and U.S. polls for decades, measuring everything from presidential and congressional approval ratings to economic confidence. But Gallup doesn't just track politics and economics. They also set the benchmark for understanding how people feel about their work, their lives, and their well-being. Now, according to the latest 2024 global report from Gallup, and 2024 is the latest because they published, a few months later, employee engagement has just declined for the first time in 4 years, dropping to 21% worldwide. And to get an idea of what that number means, I'll put a link to it on the episode webpage. This means that only 21% of employees are engaged in their jobs. That may not sound dramatic. I mean, I think it does. In any event, it is a big deal. Engagement drives productivity, retention, and innovation. And this is only the second time in 12 years this has gone down. What's even more concerning is managers, the people responsible for motivating everybody else, saw the biggest drop. And that big picture bleeds into what we see here at MGE with newer clients. And we see it reflected in statements like, I can't get my staff to do what I want them to, or my staff are non-compliant, or I can't find any good staff, and so on. And again, it's not a breathtaking discovery to learn that lack of engagement will negatively affect both performance and retention. So what's happening here? And more importantly, what should you do about it? What are some of the rudimentary steps you can take to ensure your team is highly engaged and enthusiastically performing the way that you'd always hoped they would? Well, that's what I want to talk about in this week's episode. My name is Jeff Blumberg, and I'm your host. And I think the easiest way to start this thing off is, what would be sort of the components of engagement for an employee? What would keep anybody engaged with anything? And you can kind of do this as a thought exercise for yourself. What keeps you engaged in something, whether it's your profession, a hobby, anything, right? And if we take a look at it, what would be some of the basic components? I can think of 4 simple ones right off the top of my head. The first one would be whatever the purpose or mission of whatever it is that I'm doing is something that I like and agree with. Right? If it's a hobby, it's something you like. If it's a job, you agree with the mission, you agree with the purpose. If I'm part of an organization, the organization has a mission or purpose, and it's something that I actively enjoy contributing to, and it agrees and aligns with my own personal purposes, right? If it's about helping people, I enjoy helping people. And this is obviously resolved by 2 things. 1, making sure that you have a stated mission or purpose that everybody is aware of. And 2, even more important, is actually making sure that you are fulfilling or following this purpose. If your purpose is to provide, high-end, cutting-edge healthcare to patients, to make sure that they have your ideal oral health, I'm just throwing this together very quick, folks, that contributes to better systemic health and, better quality of life and longer lifespan and things like this, well, that's a really good purpose, right? Well, if that's your stated purpose, cool, I can agree with that. But then let's say in the practice itself, what we're actually doing is we're involved in every plan we can possibly be in. We only do what insurance covers. We allow patients to sit with active disease because we don't do more than insurance covers. Well, now the walk doesn't agree with the talk, right? I'm going to see this as an employee. That's going to be a basic problem then at that point. I have all these flowery statements, but it's not being manifest in the real world. So number 1, it has to be a purpose and a mission that I agree with, and I have to see that mission and purpose actually being demonstrated in the real world. Number 2, I have to be productive in order to be engaged. There has to be something for me to do that is actually worthwhile. I'm not on the make work program where you're giving me random things to do because you don't know of anything better that I can do, right? I'm doing something that's actively contributing to the success of the business, and I'm busy. The more productive I am, the happier I'm going to be. Now, the interesting thing about this is, how would we actually make sure that a person is productive? Well, we don't want people walking around like a bunch of robots, right? Waiting for the next order in order to be told to do something, which is what a robot does, right? Actually, even now with AI, some of them, aren't waiting for the next order. Hopefully the next order isn't a bad one. But the point being is the way you make sure somebody can actually originate and own their production is they have to have a zone or an area of responsibility in the business, something that they are responsible for producing for the business. So for instance, this is where, and I've talked about this in prior episodes, this is where division of labor is very, very important. If I have 3 people at the front desk, what do we call those? I've said this before. If I have a dental hygienist or a dental assistant, and I mention those titles to you, you will have a generalized idea of what those people do, okay? Because it's a job that actually describes what they're responsible for doing. If I give you the title front desk person, what does that describe? It describes where they sit or where they reside in the office. They don't do the front desk. So if I have 3 front desk people and everybody's doing a little bit of everything, number one, if everybody's responsible for everything, then nobody is really responsible for anything. If I have a 4-hour opening, who am I talking to? The front desk. And number 2, none of them have a particular area of the business that they are accountable for or responsible for, or that conversely they can create and actually show some initiative in. That's the other side of this. So I would want to divide that labor. I might have somebody who's in charge of answering the phone and scheduling patients, somebody else who's the treatment coordinator, and I might have one person who's the office manager. I don't know. I'm just throwing this out here. I might have a receptionist and a scheduler and an office manager who also doubles as a treatment coordinator. It really depends on your situation. But each of these jobs have specific responsibilities. They have specific deliverables, something that person is responsible for creating and doing. If I'm your schedule coordinator, my job is to have a fully booked, efficient, productive schedule booked in accordance with practice policy that's continuously growing. That's what the deliverable is that you're expecting from me. And I can show you like, hey, look, we used to produce 100, now we're producing 150 since I've been on the job. And look at this. The number of openings that we have has gone down by 40%. And these are things I can show you. If I was your hygiene coordinator, I could say, look, when you started me out, we had 2 days or 2 full-time hygienists. We now have 4. And the number of openings, the hygiene show rate has gone from 78% to 96%. These are deliverables that I can show you to show you that, A, I'm doing what it is you hired me to do, number one. And that's a point of pride. I produced something. It's demonstrable. I can show you, look, this is what I did. But then also, when you're looking at who are my real players in this business, who are my productive people, well, if I have statistics on each of these people and they're specifically responsible for that zone of operation, I can see who's producing and who's not. It doesn't make it like this big mystery. Whereas if I have 3 people at the front, I might have one person working themselves half to death, one person who's sort of coasting, and one person who actually just really shouldn't be there. They're destructive. But I wouldn't know that because everybody's doing a little bit of everything. So you got to have a purpose and mission somebody agrees with. Number 2, the person has to be productive and they have to have a specific zone or area that they're responsible for creating. And they also have to know what it is they're responsible to create, what they're supposed to produce, what their deliverable is, and what the expected quantity of said deliverable is. Okay? Number 3, the person actually has to like what they're doing. If they hate what they're doing, and hate it all, that's going to be a problem, even if they're good at it. Now, I say this with a caveat. Some jobs come with good parts and bad parts. Like being a parent, you can think back to being a parent. What are the parts that you enjoyed? It wasn't changing poopy diapers. That wasn't, this is the highlight of my day, right? It was playing with your kid or, whatever. Watching how cute they are when they nap, or if your dad goes out and throws the baseball around with the son. Those are the parts you like of the job, and then there are parts that you don't like about the job. That doesn't mean you don't do each part of the job excellently, okay? So there's a fine line here. I could, let's say as a schedule coordinator, I could really enjoy doing certain parts of the job, scheduling big appointments, filling last-minute openings. Then there could be parts that I hate doing. Maybe I hate doing reactivation. But I still do it, and I still do it well. That's fine. Where this becomes a problem is when somebody says, well, I really enjoy doing this part, but I don't enjoy doing that part, so I'm going to do a poor job at it. Maybe they don't say that, but they act it out. I've seen this. And I've seen where you make the mistake as a boss is you go, okay, well, you're the scheduler and you like scheduling people in the practice, but you don't like calling people on the phone. So we're going to have Jane, the receptionist, call people on the phone. That doesn't make any sense. Person has to take both the good and the bad with the job. So I've got purpose, they're productive, they like their job. The other thing you need to keep somebody engaged is the person has to see a future with the job. See, it's funny. I don't know if you've ever had somebody give you 2 weeks notice, and then you'll sort of notice that and it takes a real strong person not to do this. I've even seen this with great employees. They give you your 2 weeks notice, and then they sort of check out. They just check out because they're leaving in 2 weeks anyway. Someone who's super responsible may not, but in the majority of cases, I've seen it where people just check out. That's why normally someone can give us 2 weeks and we'll just say, that's fine. You don't have to give us 2 weeks. We're just going to send you on your way because I have someone who's no longer creating that job, if that makes sense. Okay. And again, on the whole 2 weeks notice thing, talk to your employment attorney as far as what's right and wrong for you. We have a certain way we handle things, and employment law varies state to state. But what keeps if a person is leaving, they're no longer engaged. So a person has to see a future associated with whatever it is that they're doing. Is there room for advancement? Can I get promoted? Can I make more money? How does this contribute to my overall life goals? Does this align with my overall life goals, right? So assuming you have that, then that will help keep somebody engaged. And on top of that, something to think about is, let's say I hire somebody. This person is very driven, very ambitious, but I'm not, and the business isn't really growing, and I don't feel like it really needs to grow all that much. I'm happy coasting along. That's going to be a good employee I'm probably going to lose because this person is hungry and wants to create more. So if I want to attract people who are ambitious and want to create more, I have to have the idea of growth and expansion, that trajectory in my mind as I'm hiring these people. That has to be something that I'm actively trying to do. I've seen it where we have clients will hire some people who, they hire a new employee and they have a good office manager already, but they can see this new employee after a few months is a great manager prospect in their own right. Well, eventually that person might be promoted to a junior manager under the main office manager, or this doctor may buy a second location, in which case they take that employee and move them into the second location as the manager. But anyway, in a nutshell, that's going to keep the person engaged. I have a future here. I can see myself here 5, 10, 20 years from now because this is something that I can continue to create and there's a future in it for me. And lastly, it's very important to people. Sure, it's important that we have jobs. It's important that we make money to pay our bills. But, people usually want a little bit of a higher mission. They want to know that what they're doing is actually making a difference in some sense. So one thing that I'd recommend that you do, especially in dentistry, there's cases where, you do basic run-of-the-mill dentistry and patients are happy and it's contributing to the overall purpose of your practice. Then you're going to have those really big wins, where someone just had a completely bombed out, smile, looked bad. They came in, they got it fixed, and they're just beside themselves and sent the practice flowers and it changed their lives and things of that nature, right? Those types of wins that you have in the practice should be shared with the employees regularly. If you have a staff meeting, and you got flowers and a really nice card from a patient this week, I would read the card and show everybody the before and after with that patient. This way, the whole staff knows that from their job, whether it was your new patient coordinator who scheduled them in the first place, or, the dental assistant who helped you with the procedures or whatever, or the treatment coordinator who closed the case, they know that their job is contributing to creating this bigger, greater, nice effect. If you do all of those things, people will generally stay engaged, okay? Now, what may create a disengagement from that point forward would be either you hired the wrong person in the first place, right? In which case they never really were engaged in the first place, or there are things going wrong with them or things going wrong with you as a manager. So back in, I think it was a few months ago, episodes 177 through 179 it was a series of 3 episodes called The Step-by-Step Guide to the Hiring and Interview Process. It was like this big series of stuff, but it was very, very detailed with a lot of forms and stuff. That gives you the basics on what you should be doing during the hiring process. I definitely recommend you check that out. And obviously on the MGE Power Program, we get very, very heavily into hiring. And I don't want to rehash that all in this episode. But one thing I will say is this, that a lot of cases where I see things go wrong with employees, it had to do with them hiring a bad fit in the first place. Not always, but in some cases it's a bad fit. And in a nutshell, how can I avoid this bad fit? There's a couple of basic things I can do. Number one, during the hiring process itself, I want to be very clear about what it is I'm hiring them to do. I want them to understand the mission of the practice. I want to understand what position I'm hiring them for. I want them to understand what the purpose of their position is and why it exists. You're the schedule coordinator, and this is why I have a schedule coordinator. I want them to know what their deliverables, sorry, I have trouble with that word from some time to time, what their deliverables and expectations are. In other words, I expect you coming in, this is the kind of schedule I expect you to create for me, and I expect a 20 to 30% bump in my overall production by hiring you, okay? And I want them to understand that they are going to be accountable for those deliverables, all right? And then, of course, I'm going to go over my basics, benefits and the hours and things of that nature and how much the job pays. I'm going over that stuff very early in the interview process. And the reason I do is if a person has a serious disagreement with any of these points, there's really no point in going any further. I'm wasting their time and mine. It's a bad fit. Someone says, well, it could be even something as stupid as the hours. I'm open Monday through Thursday from 8 to 4 and Friday from 8 to 1. And they go, oh, but I can't work Fridays. Okay, well, why am I trying? This is just not a good fit. I've seen people get into all types of, mental gymnastics going, okay, well, maybe I could have them work every other Friday. No, it's just not a good fit. Move on and find somebody who can work Monday through Friday for your hours. There's going to be somebody who fits that bill. Or they may not like the idea that you're out of network. They think that patients pay too much for dentistry, and this is who you're hiring for your treatment coordinator. That's a bad fit. It's nothing bad on them or bad on you. It's just not a good way to start off. All right, number one. And again, I get into this in great detail in those other episodes. But let's say they check all the boxes and you hire them. And I don't know, you're going to eventually want this person to be your scheduler. Or it could be dental assistant, whatever it is. So it's a no experience person who wants to become a dental assistant. Well, what am I going to do with this person? Like immediately start training them for hours and hours and hours per day? Absolutely not. Training is going to cost me a lot of time and money personally, number one. Number two, why would I spend that time and money on somebody that's really not proven anything to me yet? So usually with a newer employee, what I'm going to do after I do my basic onboarding and orientation to the business itself is I'm going to have them do simple tasks that I teach them how to do and see if they can actually do them. So let's say it's a new front desk person that I eventually want to be my scheduler. Well, with that person, I'm going to have them maybe do some reactivation calls. You probably have tons of patients that need to be scheduled for hygiene appointments. Okay, cool. So I'm going to teach this person how to do reactivation calls, and that does not take very long. If they haven't been in for 3 years, they need a new initial. Look here to see their date of birth, so you're not calling a house and asking for Johnny and he's 11, right? Simple stuff. This is where you can schedule them on the schedule. Because let's say I put them on the phone for a couple days, and they're making their calls and they schedule no patients. Well, this person really can't get anything done. This is a problem. Or let's say I tell them, always look at date of birth before you call anybody. And then they call somebody and they ask for an 11-year-old to come to the phone. You go, wait a minute. You grab the phone and handle it. Oh, sorry, Marge. Yeah, it's a new employee. Okay, Marge, you were trying to get Johnny scheduled. And then they do it again. And then they do it again. Well, this is telling me two things, and this is the reason why I do this with somebody before I give them a ton of training. I just do basic orientation and basic tasks at this point, is one, can they actually get anything done? If they've been on the phone for 2 days and they've scheduled nobody, they're probably not going to be a good fit for my business. I would have expected to schedule at least maybe 10, 12 people, or whatever it is, whatever your expectation is. And two, if they can't follow instructions, this just isn't going to work. Because if you look at what training is instructions. If the person can't follow my simple instructions, how in the world are they going to follow the more complex instructions on how to run the software and schedule patients on a staggered system with 2 assistants, with an assistant in each room? They're not going to even be close. They can't follow basic instructions like look for the date of birth before you make a phone call. So that's why I'm having the person start off with simple tasks before I put them on more complex tasks and invest a lot of time into training them. If I had a person who wanted to be a dental assistant and had no experience, you could teach them to do sterilization and stock rooms. And obviously you're going to have to keep an eye on this because you can't have them screw up sterilization. But assuming they can follow those simple directions and they get it done, and they get it done in the time that I expect them to get it done, well, now they're showing me something. They're showing me that they can produce something and they can follow instructions, in which case I can invest more time into training this person. The other thing this does is by allowing somebody to do these simple tasks, and I can always give them more if they're very knowledgeable or good, but by allowing this person to do these simple tasks, it gives them a chance to sort of ease into the organization. If you can think back to a time when you started a new job, it can be a bit overwhelming. It's first time you've gone to this place. You had to get directions to go there, use Google Maps. You don't know where anything is. Well, now they have a few days to start getting up and running to show you that they can actually do something, and it gives them a chance to meet the other staff and get the how the flow of the practice works and things like this, so they can sort of ease into the organization. Now, assuming this person has shown me that they can produce and they can follow instructions and they checked all the boxes when I hired them, now I can start training them. But when I start training them, how am I going to train them? Am I going to just give them a book and put them in the break room? No. I'm going to have them learn some things, and then I'm going to have them see those things manifest in the physical universe, meaning they're going to learn, the basics of being a treatment coordinator. Now they're going to sit in with me as the office manager, and I've been doubling as a treatment coordinator to do some treatment presentations. And then I'm going to give them from there, I'm going to give them small pieces of the presentation. Initially, it might be help this patient fill out this paperwork or run this credit card. You see, then maybe when they got the ball a little bit more, I'll have them do smaller presentations. The doctor needs you to collect the copay on these 2 crowns. And then eventually, as this person has wins doing this, and they get better and they get better and they get better, I have a treatment coordinator. And obviously, I'm keeping a statistic for their job to make sure that they're actually doing a good one, right? But that's the general nature of how it would work. And that's the basic of how you get somebody up and running. Assuming they have all of those components I mentioned to keep them engaged, and you do that to get them up and running, you'll end up potentially with a pretty decent employee. Now, if you're having trouble, what does that usually boil back to? Well, it can boil back to some employee problems, or it might boil back to some you problems, okay, as the employer. What might those be? Well, one, we might have somebody who's just unwilling. They're there for the paycheck. They're just, coming in, want to get paid, and want to go. Now, usually that will show up in lack of productivity. And if they're that unwilling, we will have caught this early on during that process where we're having them help us before we've given them a big job, right? They're doing reactivation calls, and we'll pick up on that. Another side to this that I've seen more recently is you might have somebody who's competent and can actually do the job, but they have this idea that it's okay for non-job things to infringe on the job. They're having problems with their boyfriend or girlfriend, and they feel like it's okay to be sad and miss work and not make phone calls because, of what's going on in their personal life. And obviously, if it's a serious personal catastrophe, someone passed away, I understand. But if, having trouble with your boyfriend or girlfriend is not an excuse to not do your job. But some people just can't get over themselves, and they can't stop doing that, in which case it's maybe just not going to be a good fit. I had a client who had a dental assistant like that who would constantly explain her personal and family problems to patients. And the doctor was empathetic and helped whenever he could. But after a while, he told her, look, you can't do this with patients anymore. And then, lo and behold, an hour later, she's doing the same thing with the patient. So he had to eventually let her go. So if you have somebody who can't see that wall between the personal life and work, that may also be a problem, even though they might be a halfway decent employee. But if they're unwilling, that hopefully shows up early in the process, but you might find it later. Okay. You may have another problem with employees, you may have somebody who has parts of the job that they like and parts of the job that they don't like. Well, as I mentioned earlier, there's going to be parts of any job that you like or don't like, but they have to be able to do them, right? Number 3, you might have somebody who's just incapable of doing the job. Like they don't have the aptitude for that particular job. Now, hopefully you will have found that out. If you're doing this hiring process I mentioned to you, we're earlier on seeing if they can get something done, you will have found that out earlier on. If you're not doing that way and this person's been working for you, you might find that they're just not capable, in which case you have 2 choices. One, and this is after you've trained them in the whole thing, okay? One, you can possibly use them elsewhere in the organization. Maybe they're a bad fit for the front desk, but they'd make a decent dental assistant. Cool. Or you're going to have to move on and find somebody else. Those are usually the problems that you're going to have with an employee. Of course, there can be more specialized problems, but those would be the problems you'll have more with them as far as why they're not performing. The you problems or the employer problems usually boil down to 4 simple things. One is lack of oversight, supervision, and correction, meaning you're seeing the person messing up, or you're maybe not seeing the person mess up. They're just messing up, and you're not correcting it. I hate to use exercise analogies, but you can use even a sports analogy. If you have somebody who's playing baseball, I played baseball growing up, so your stance when you're batting is bad, and you get used to it, and you've hit some balls that way. Eventually, that becomes what's your muscle memory. You're used to that bad batting stance, and then you're going to have problems fixing that because you've done it that way more often than doing it correctly. So I'm going to make sure, especially with someone who's newer, if they screw something up, that I correct it so that they get used to doing it the right way. I want someone to get used to doing it the right way. Okay? There's an infinite number of wrong ways of doing things, but this is why I'm the boss. I want to make sure that they're doing it the right way so that becomes almost their muscle memory, for lack of a better word. Another you problem may be lack of training, meaning I have somebody, I've put them on the job and they're willing, but they don't have the skills necessary in order to accomplish the job. Well, whose job is it to make sure that they have those skills? That's me. So let's say I have a receptionist and they just are not very good at converting some new patient calls. They're good at the easy ones, but the shoppers and the out-of-network calls, they tend to mess those up. Well, I better do some training with that person, or the person is going to start to accumulate losses, okay? The third thing is I might have unrealistic expectations. Maybe the person I had on the job before was a generational talent, the best treatment coordinator that ever walked. Well, I'm probably not going to replace them with somebody else. I might need two people to replace them. So I want to have realistic expectations on what's, it's almost like you have to have in your mind what's acceptable, what's above average, and what's unacceptable, right? So if my great, amazing treatment coordinator could close 80% of cases and I hire somebody and I get them up to the point where they can close 50 to 70, that's decent. Whereas if somebody's only closing 30, that's not going to work. Do you see? I've seen cases where I've actually had to replace one person with 2 or 3 because the person was that good. And then lastly, usually the U problem will boil down to a poor outline of duties and responsibilities. No division of labor. I have a bunch of people, front desk people, things of that nature. I'm not giving the person any responsibility. And like I said, this could be a combination of any of these U problems and them problems that create these factors. In any event, the one thing I've learned over the years, it's true, is great staff are not hired, they're made. And while it's been said a lot, it doesn't make it any less true. And it's one of the more trusty datums of management I've observed in my career. I've seen it play out numerous times. And the nice thing about this, your employees' engagement and who you have working in your practice and your ability to train them, all of these things, right, are completely 100% within your control. That's the beautiful thing about this. This is not something that you have zero control over like the weather. This is something you can completely control. And this is something that if you need help with, we're happy to help you with. This is ultimately what a client learns to do, or one of the things a client learns to do on the MGE Power Program. Anyway, that's all I have for you this week. I hope this helps. I have the links to that Gallup poll article on the episode webpage. You can also go ahead and check out, and the link to the MGE Power Program. You can also check out those episodes I mentioned a little bit earlier, episodes 177 through 179 on hiring if you want to. There's a lot of cool forms on there as well. If you want to find out more about MGE, you can check us out online at mgeonline.com or call us at 800-640-1140. Folks, have a great week, and we will see you at the next episode.